Remington 700. It's a bit dusty because it's in here, but that one, that's an oil finish on there, in just the way I'm going to do this one. So, bit of lacquer thinner, and this is also where you get to see for the first time what your wood's really going to be like. So you just wipe it in, get all the dust in there, wipe it in the holes. And it evaporates very fast. So it's not like you're wetting it with water and then about minutes it's to dry again. Bam. On everything, wipe it right over the ebony. Start to see what it's going to look like, even though it's dull. And I'm not going to endlessly video sanding. You just can imagine how much it takes. You just keep doing it until you see no errors at all. Okay, so let's wash that into the grain. Looks pretty nice. And then, because it's not time lapse, here's the action. This is a little 22 mag. It'll look right. Trigger guard and everything's over there. The original gun, everything is on the surface. I've countersunk it. I'm going to countersink the trigger guard, I'm going to countersink this magazine bracket that's over there so that it's below the surface. On the original stock, it's all just sticks out. So I'm doing a few upgrades with it. I've also raised the cheek piece on it because I'm going to have a scope on it. That stock was a bit too low for a scope. So I think it looks nice too. So once it's been wiped with the spirit and the grain is like the dust been rubbed into the grain, I'm going to now fill the grain. I've got an old bottle of sealer and filler, Birchwood Casey, and it's just going to go in. Look, zoom in close, come up close to this, and you'll see tiny little holes in the grain of the wood everywhere. That's what we're filling. So it's early on and the stock's not finished. The sanding isn't finished, some of the last little bits of shaping isn't finished. But I'm going to put this on because while I'm sanding it, it's going to be filling the grain. So you literally just put it, there's a bolt in there which helps stir it. You put your hand over there and you get some on there, and then you just rub it on. And it just goes in, and it's not a finish, it's literally a grain sealer. So once it's on, you just let it dry a little bit and then sand it back off, back down to the surface of the wood. So the only sealant that's left is the sealant that's inside the grain. So you're left with a flat surface of wood with no holes. And I do this, you won't see it on the video, but I do this a lot. You just keep doing it until it's dead flat after you've sanded it. And the sanding will go 400 grit, 500 grit, and then I go to steel wool and polish it, and you'll start seeing defects. And the moment you see defects, you've got to keep doing it, and keep filling, and you just keep doing it until there are no defects. And every time it becomes smoother and shinier, more and more defects will appear. Unless you are really good. So this isn't like an oil or anything, it's literally just packing it in to the grain. Plus you get to see the grain for the first time. Whoops. Just make sure it's everywhere. It's sticky, but it doesn't matter how it goes on. It can be thick, it can be, I mean, it looks like hell, but it dries and then you sand it off. So the more the better, because it's filling the grain. And then on a subsequent coat to this, I will sand it and steel wool it and leave the dust on it, and then the sealer will pick up the dust and jam the dust in the holes too, and it makes it even smoother. Cut. So once the grain sealer, I mean you can see it everywhere, it's not beautifully applied, it doesn't need to be, it's coming off. Once it's not sticky and it's on, then I just get a little bit of it, same stuff, sealer and filler. It's very sticky and thick. Put a little bit of it there on some kind of tray, and then a bit of lacquer thinner, which is what I wiped it with earlier. Just mix those two, and then with steel wool just go all over the whole stock, and you're doing several things. You're polishing it, you're cutting the grain, you're filling the grain, you're making sawdust, you're rounding off some of the high points, and when it gets thick you just add a bit more thinner to it, and you just build up a flat hard layer rather than a porous wooden layer, which will feel like glass when it's finished. And then you put on the final finish, which would be like a hand-rubbed tongue oil. And I'll show you that later on too. But I've just got to get this on here while it's still tacky. So the steel wool is making sawdust, and then the sawdust is being picked up by the stickiness and then being jammed into the pores of the wood. And I just use steel wool because sandpaper just clogs up, and I want the wood to clog up. The steel wool uses a bit more of it because it soaks into it, but if they're right, it's cheap compared to the rest of the thing. Do the barrel channel. I mean, you can put oil in here too and seal it, but I'm just concentrating on the outside while I've got this here. The lacquer thinner will evaporate off and leave just it's becoming thick now. And again, it doesn't have to be beautiful, it just has to cover the whole thing. Just building up layers and layers of it on here. And that's gone. And you don't have to go with the grain. Go every direction. You want to just fill it. Fill the grain. You can still see the little holes, but they're part of the appeal of it. They're part of the colour. Now they look like they're just black. I'll show it close up later. They just look like they're full. This is 000. It barely removes anything. It literally polishes. So you can run right over sharp corners and ridges with it, and it'll just polish. It won't remove wood, but it creates a really fine sawdust, and that's what you're after. The sawdust will go into all those pores. Okay. See how it's just dull, but smooth. So now when that's dry, I'll probably sand it really finely to knock the top off the grain that's been raised with something like 400 grit, and then repeat it until the tiny pores are flush with the surface, and the sanding removes the wood back down to the surface of the wood but leaves the pores full. So half an hour later, I've just steel wooled that back to smooth again, but the grain is not full, and you can still feel that there's a little bit of just edginess to the, you can hear it. So what I'm going to do is this, maybe excessive, but you can't get too fine, 800 grit. I want to make some really fine sawdust with that and this, with the grain filler. So I make up another little mix of some grain filler with a little bit of the lacquer thinner, probably 50-50. If it gets too thick, you just add more. This is wet and dry, so I'm just going to put it in that. Get a bit of each. And then as you're rubbing it, the superfine sandpaper is making superfine sawdust. That grain appearing. And it's jamming it in all the holes again. So like I was saying before, the sandpaper flattens. The steel wool polishes. So if there's a bump, the steel wool will make it a smooth bump. But the sandpaper will remove the bump. So this is sanding off the high points and making that dust go into the low points. And it's messy, and you just slather it on and you can't screw up. I mean, it's like, this is just, you know, it looks like it's everywhere, and you just keep sanding it. If it gets too thick, thin it. And you can hear with sandpaper, if it means it's still rough. As it goes quiet, it becomes smooth. So you sand until it goes quiet. And you'll see it not trying to go in the wood in places, you just have to sand harder. So this is getting a little bit thick, so I'm going to add some more of this. Keep it over there in case you spill it. If you use the grain sealer just on its own, neat, like direct, it's so thick that you can't really manage it. So I always thin it. Same with the oil, when we put on the oil at the end. I put the oil on, but I cut it a bit with that stuff. So it should have a sort of rough old feel to it when this is happening. We're just literally packing it on. It's sticky. I like the birchwood casey stuff. The other nice thing about this finish is if you damage it ever, if you scratch it, or you just literally sand it and oil it again right over the same place, whereas with a polyurethane or any kind of lacquer finish sprayed on, you've got to refinish the whole stock because it's hard to do the it's hard to repair it. This, if you didn't like the cheek piece, for example, you could literally just file it off, flatten it, re-oil it, and you're done. But right now we're just making this into a sticky mess on purpose because you want to pack it into the grain. It's terrible now, but at the end when it's sanded off flat, you see how shiny it is? It's perfect. So rather than bore you with this while I carry on for the next 10 minutes, So this is going to be how you put on the true oil. This has been grain filled and sanded and grain filled and steel wooled and grain filled until it's, and that's just bare wood with grain filler in it. There's a bit of a shine on it even now, which is what you want. It's been sanded to 400 and 800. 800 is, you don't really need 800, but 400 and steel wool polishing it to get it down to where it's pretty shiny with nothing on it. Now, true oil gunstock finish. Just get it online. This is the fun part. You literally get the true oil, put your hand over the end, and you get a circle of it on your hand. Not much. Better too little than not enough. And you just rub it on and keep it really thin. Don't let it ever be like thickly glomming up. One more, the side, and then just really spread it around. Don't make it go a long way. Don't let it be thick. You can always add more. Get it in all the nooks and crannies. And then it will sort of run out on your hand and it will start to feel a bit slow. So once it's at the slow stage, like it's dragging, don't go anymore. Another one on the forend. And now you've got to try and find a way to hold it without holding it where it's wet. Don't finish in one place like that and take it off. Always come off in a movement, otherwise it will leave a print. A little bit around here, not much though. Get all on the top. The end grain will suck it up a bit more. Remember, this is only the first coat. A little bit there, because you can see that under the bolt. This is end grain. And then catch it in the light so you can make sure that all surfaces. It's a little bit thin there. Barely any. That's end grain as well on the back of the cheek piece. And you'll see some dry spots, but let them be dry because you're going to do it again. That is dry already. Look at that. The whole thing is bloody nearly dry already. So, you'll see some slightly dry areas and you'll see some slightly wetter areas where the wood's absorbing it at different rates or it's sealing at different rates. But I don't know if you can see on there how the grain is now really showing. It's actually a really nice piece of wood. This bit of wood was with both gun stocks, two of them. I thought there was enough room in it for one, there was two. It was 280 bucks. So, 140 bucks for this piece of wood. And then, 4 days of sanding and you've got a stock like this. Yeah. Okay. Dry enough for another coat. So just same thing, concentrating on any areas that are thin. This second coat is going to get a bit draggier a bit sooner because it's got the other coat under it. So just go on it quickly while it's still slippery. And never too much. You're kind of, once you put it on there, you're actually trying to wipe it off. So you're thinking, shit, too much, I've got to get rid of that. fore end. One lot will do the fore end because it's already shiny, already sealed. Make sure you get the end. And then just drag the whole thing so there's no stop marks on it. Second coat. Catch it in the light, see if there's any dry spots. That's one. I don't know if you can see that. So you work for 4 or 5 days solid, which is roughly what it took if I put it all together, waiting for the fun part, and the fun part's over in 10 seconds, making it shiny. And the nice thing about this is if you damage it, you could literally, if you damaged it, you'd sand it and reapply a little bit of that to it and it'd be fixed. Whereas if it was a polyurethane, you'd have to sand the whole thing off and refinish it from scratch. I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to do another coat in about 20 minutes. So, I mean, I should have done it before, I suppose, but it doesn't really matter. Oops. I'm just going to do inside. You just literally, you don't have to be careful about it, you just put it everywhere, because inside, if you were out in the rain shooting, and the water ran down the side of the gun into the stock, it would go into the bare bits of wood, and it would expand it, and then it would crack it, and it would, you'd see little splits on it too. So you've got to put it everywhere. This will stop any water going in. Put it on pretty thick in there. This stuff dries out. If you leave the bottle unattended for a while, it'll dry out. So you put a bolt or a bit of gravel or something in it to displace it so it's always full, there's no air, and it'll last indefinitely. So, and also when you shake it, when you come to use it, it's got a bolt in it which stirs it up, which makes it easier to get it all mixed. It's a bit too full when I put my finger in there before. Just you gotta get all the nooks and crannies. And then since my hand's already covered in stuff, I'm just going to do the whole thing again. Making these videos is random for background noise. There's a backhoe out there that's bleeping. I don't know if you can hear it. Anyway, here we go. Okay, third coat. Keep it moving. Barrel channel. By the way, that barrel channel doesn't touch the barrel. The mechanism is supported only here. It would make the barrel channel a tiny bit lower so the barrel doesn't touch it. It should float. So these coats you put on now, they're literally to your taste. If you don't want any, you don't have to put any on. You could just, before I started this, you could have just waxed it. It's not as good a protection, but it would be a slight shine to it. I like them to be a bit shiny. I mean, I can dull this down later by buffing it, but I want it to be potentially very shiny. because it shows up the wood more, and I like making things out of wood, and walnut especially. This all started, gunstock making, when I was a kid. I had an air rifle and I broke its stock right there, a little $10 air rifle. But it was my only air rifle, and I broke it. And I thought, well, I can't afford another one, 30 bucks. So I'm going to make one. So I got a bit of wood and my dad's drill and a sanding disc and some chisels, and disappeared for a couple of weeks into the cellar and underneath our house in the basement in England. Came up covered in sawdust with a new stock, and it came out really well. It was surprising. So this is probably what, the 10th one I've made, and they've all been very similar. Okay, this is a little bit thick, so I'm just going to kind of make sure it's thinner. If it squeaks, it's dry. You can hear it going. Hear the squeak? That's dry. It's kind of what you want. You can get that everywhere. Okay. So there'll be little marks on it, just hand rub lines, marks, which you can polish off later with very, very fine steel wool, very, very lightly, and then wax it with regular, just furniture polish wax. Hopefully that's showing the light on it. And while I'm doing it, I'm seeing areas that need a little quick brush. There we are. So the final countdown. Now let it dry, put it together. Now what do I do? That's it. This is the finished product. This is the end of the second video, the finishing video of putting on the oil finish. The first video is the actual making of the stock by hand from scratch. You'll see that here on the channel as well. I just wanted to give you a final view of it. If you like this, very un-Skywagon University, because I normally talk about aircraft, but this is something else that I do I thought might be interesting. So if you like the video, please subscribe on the button down below and the little bell next to it. If you click on the bell, you get notifications of new videos. So thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.